They called it the last perfect summer. June 1999. The world was buzzing with Y2K paranoia, boy bands ruled the radio, and disposable cameras captured memories people thought would last forever. In a quiet American town tucked between pine forests and cracked highways, the graduating class of 1999 stood shoulder to shoulder in blue gowns, laughing, crying, promising each other they'd never forget this moment. Parents clapped. Teachers smiled. Cameras flashed. No one knew they were watching ghosts in advance. That night, 23 seniors packed their bags for a graduation trip meant to be unforgettable. A final adventure before adulthood swallowed them whole. The plan was simple. A 3-day road trip to a remote lakeside town. Cheap cabins, bonfires, music, freedom. One last time to be reckless. One last time to be young. They left just after sunrise, and none of them were ever seen again. At first, no one panicked. A missed phone call here. A delayed check-in there. Self-service was spotty back then. Everyone knew that. Parents told themselves the same comforting lie. They're fine. They're just having fun. By day 3, the lies collapsed. The first police report was filed by a mother who hadn't slept in 48 hours. Then another, and another. By nightfall, the police station was flooded with frantic parents, clutching graduation photos, pointing at smiling faces and begging officers to tell them where their children were. The vans were missing. The luggage was missing. The kids were missing. Search teams were deployed along highways, forests, lakes. Helicopters combed the treetops. Divers searched the water. Roadblocks were set up in every direction. News vans rolled in, hungry for tragedy. The story exploded nationwide. Class of 1999 vanishes without a trace. Theories multiplied like rot. A mass kidnapping. A cult. A fatal accident hidden deep in the wilderness. A voluntary disappearance. Kids running away together, starting new lives. But none of it fit. There were no ransom demands. No wreckage. No bodies. No goodbyes. Just silence. Weeks turned into months. Months into years. Candlelight vigils faded. Missing posters yellowed on telephone poles. Parents aged visibly. Grief carving permanent lines into their faces. Some marriages didn't survive the waiting. Some parents never left their living rooms, convinced their child would walk to the door any minute. The case went cold. But the town never did. People swore they heard things in the forest at night. Engines, laughter, music drifting on the wind. Hunters claimed they found campsites that looked too organized to be random. But when they returned with authorities, the sites were gone. A gas station clerk once insisted she saw a familiar face on a late-night news segment. Older, thinner, but unmistakable. Nothing could be proven. 22 years passed. Then, in the fall of 2021, a construction crew began clearing land for a new reservoir deep in the same forest where the graduation trip was supposed to end. It was routine work. Trees fell. Earth was moved. History was erased inch by inch. Until a backhoe struck metal. At first, they thought it was scrap. Old junk buried decades ago. But as dirt was cleared away, a shape emerged, too smooth, too deliberate. A vehicle. Then another. Then another. By sunset, the site was sealed off by police tape. Beneath 6 feet of compacted soil, hidden like a secret the earth itself tried to forget, lay the remains of the missing vans. Inside them, time had stopped. Personal items were scattered exactly where they had been left. Sunglasses on dashboards. A mixtape labeled Senior Trip Fire still inside a cassette player. Graduation caps crumpled on the floor. Phones, ancient by modern standards, sat dead in cup holders, batteries long since corroded. And then they found the first bone. The discovery sent shockwaves through the country. News anchors struggled to keep their voices steady. Parents, now elderly, exhausted, hollow, were notified with a phone call they both prayed for and feared for over 2 decades. They finally had answers. Or so they thought. Forensic teams worked in silence, cataloging every detail. What they found didn't just reopen the case. It rewrote it entirely. There were no signs of a crash, no impact damage, no skid marks, no evidence of mechanical failure. The vans had been parked, perfectly aligned, as if the drivers had chosen to stop there, as if everyone inside had gotten out willingly. But the bodies told a different story. Some remains were found far from the vehicles, scattered through the trees. Others were still inside, seated upright. One skeleton was found gripping the handle of a door that was never opened, and none of them showed signs of a struggle. No broken bones, no defensive wounds, no bullets, no blades, just abandonment. The medical examiner paused before giving the cause of death. Exposure, they said, hypothermia, dehydration, which raised a single horrifying question no one wanted to ask out loud. Why didn't they leave? The forest wasn't endless. The highway was less than 3 miles away. Even injured, even afraid, they should have been able to find help, unless something kept them there. Diaries were recovered next. Water damaged, mold-eaten, barely readable. But some pages survived, and what they described chilled even seasoned investigators. One entry read, "Something is wrong. We keep hearing footsteps, but no one's there." Another, "They told us to stay. Said help was coming." Another, written in shaky handwriting, barely legible, "We shouldn't have followed the lights." No one ever identified who they were. As the story resurfaced, old witnesses came forward. People who had stayed silent for years, afraid of being labeled crazy. A retired park ranger admitted he once found the group's campsite, but left after hearing voices coming from nowhere. A truck driver claimed he saw a line of young people walking into the woods at night, calmly, silently, as if in a trance. The town turned uneasy. The forest was closed. And then something happened that no official report could explain. During a live news broadcast from the site, viewers noticed movement behind the reporter. Between the trees, just for a second, a row of shapes appeared, standing still, watching. When the camera panned back, they were gone. The footage went viral. Frame-by-frame analysis revealed what looked disturbingly like human figures wearing graduation gowns. Authorities dismissed it as shadows, but the parents didn't. Neither did the people who grew up there. Because some nights, when the wind cuts just right through the trees, the forest still hums with distant music, tinny, distorted, like it's playing from a broken cassette tape buried underground. And locals swear that if you listen closely, you can hear young voices laughing, waiting. The families thought the worst part was over. They were wrong. As the excavation continued, investigators began to realize the forest hadn't just hidden the truth for 22 years. It had preserved it. The soil composition, the lack of oxygen, the way the vans were buried so carefully, none of it was accidental. Someone or something had made sure this place stayed untouched. And the deeper they dug, the stranger the evidence became. Beneath the vans, engineers discovered a narrow trench running parallel to the vehicles. Too clean to be erosion, too straight to be natural. It stretched into the trees, disappearing beneath roots and rock, like a scar the forest tried to heal over. Ground-penetrating radar revealed more. Hollow spaces, dozens of them, cavities beneath the earth, scattered in an almost deliberate pattern, forming a rough circle around where the vans had been parked. Not caves, not animal dens, something else. Excavation was halted. Federal agencies stepped in. And that's when the rumors started. Former students from the same school began reaching out to journalists, claiming they'd experienced something similar years earlier, though not as severe. A group of juniors who'd gone camping in 1997 reported seeing strange lights moving through the trees, lights that didn't flicker like flashlights and didn't behave like fireflies. When they followed them, they swore the forest seemed to stretch, loop, distort. They barely made it back before dawn. No one believed them back then. Now, people were listening. Among the recovered items was a handheld camcorder, a bulky late 90s model, miraculously intact inside a padded bag. The tape inside had degraded badly, but technicians managed to recover fragments of footage. What played on the screen made hardened investigators sit in silence. The video began lighthearted. Laughing teens. Someone yelling about running out of snacks. A boy filming himself in the mirror of the van, graduation cap tilted sideways, joking that they'd made it out alive. Then the tone shifted. Night. The camera shook as someone whispered, telling the others to be quiet. The lens zoomed toward the trees. Darkness swallowed most of the frame. But then, faintly, there it was. A glow. Not a single light. Multiple. Floating between the trunks. Pulsing softly, like breathing. Someone off camera asked, "Are those people?" No answer. The glow moved closer. The audio cracked with panic. Another voice said, "They're waving at us." The camera fell to the ground. For several seconds, all that could be heard was breathing. Fast, shallow, terrified. Then footsteps. Not running. Walking. Heavy. Slow. And finally, a voice that didn't belong to any of them. Calm. Measured. Almost kind. "You're safe here," it said. "Stay where you are." The footage ended. Experts couldn't identify the voice. It didn't match any known accent. Audio enhancement revealed something worse. The voice carried a layered echo, as if more than one person was speaking at the same time, perfectly synchronized. The tape was classified. But leaks are inevitable. Within days, the audio spread online, dissected by millions. Some people claimed to hear names being spoken beneath the words. Others swore the voice changed pitch if listened to with headphones. A few claimed that after hearing it, they dreamed of the forest, waking up with dirt under their fingernails. Then came the final discovery. At the center of the underground cavities, directly beneath what a bonfire would have been, workers uncovered a chamber. Small, crude, hand-reinforced with wood and stone. Not ancient, but not modern either. Inside were symbols carved into the walls. Not letters, not runes. Shapes that hurt to look at for too long. Lines that seemed to bend the longer you stared, as if refusing to stay still. Some of the symbols were partially scratched out, like someone had tried, desperately, to erase them. In the middle of the chamber lay a circle of personal belongings. Shoes, watches, rings, graduation tassels, all arranged with care. At the edge of the circle, pressed into the dirt, were handprints. Too many of them. Some large, some small, some not quite human. The official conclusion was delivered quietly, without cameras. The deaths were ruled accidental. The forest was deemed unstable. The site was permanently sealed. But the parents noticed something that no report mentioned. None of the remains were found holding each other. No final embraces. No groups huddled for warmth. No signs of collective panic. It was as if they'd been separated, one by one, guided. A former investigator, speaking anonymously years later, admitted the truth almost broke him. According to GPS reconstructions and soil disturbances, the students didn't wander randomly. They followed a path, a precise one, a path that led in circles, never outward, always back to the center, always back to the lights. Today, the forest no longer appears on most maps. Satellite images blur strangely over the area. Locals avoid it. Animals won't cross the tree line. Even sound behaves differently there. Voices die faster. Echoes don't return. And every year, on the exact night the class of 1999 disappeared, park rangers report the same thing. Music, faint, warped, familiar. A graduation mixtape, playing deep beneath the ground. And sometimes just before dawn, fresh footprints appear around the sealed site, all facing inward. The sealed site was supposed to end it. Concrete poured. Steel plates bolted down. Warning signs posted in half a dozen languages. The government called it an environmental hazard. Locals called it a grave. Everyone agreed on one thing. Whatever happened, it was finally buried. For 6 months, nothing happened. Then the calls began. The first came from a woman in Oregon who had never been to the town, never heard of the case until she saw a late-night documentary replay. She called a radio station during a live segment, her voice shaking, saying she'd woken up to the sound of laughter outside her bedroom window. Teenagers laughing. When she looked out, the street was empty, but her driveway was covered in muddy footprints, all different sizes, all pointing toward her front door. She ended the call by saying something that made the host go quiet. They were wearing blue. More calls followed. Different states. Different people. Same details. Dreams of a forest they'd never visited. Music they couldn't get out of their heads. A calm voice telling them, "Stay where you are. Help is coming." Psychologists dismissed it as mass hysteria, a viral case bleeding into the subconscious of a population already primed for fear. The human brain filling in gaps, except for one problem. Some of the callers knew things they couldn't have known. Lyrics from the mixtape that was never released to public. Names of students whose identities were sealed at the family's request. Descriptions of symbols found in the underground chamber. Symbols the authorities had never shown anyone. That's when a former member of the graduating class finally broke his silence. He hadn't gone on the trip. At the last minute, his parents had grounded him. He'd slammed his bedroom door that night, furious, convinced his life was over. By morning, his friends were gone forever. For 22 years, he lived with survivor's guilt. Therapy, medication, nightmares. He told himself it was coincidence that he'd always avoided forests, avoided lakes, avoided silence. Until the discovery. In an anonymous interview, he admitted something he'd never told anyone, not even his wife. On the night his classmates disappeared, he woke up at exactly 3:17 a.m. Standing at the foot of his bed were people he recognized. Older, thinner, pale, still wearing their graduation gowns. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They just watched him, eyes hollow but patient, like they were waiting for permission. Then one of them stepped forward, the girl he'd had a crush on since sophomore year. She smiled, and in a voice that echoed, layered and wrong, she said, "You were supposed to come." He screamed. His parents ran in. The room was empty, but his carpet was wet with mud. Authorities tried to shut the story down. Interviews were pulled. Videos were flagged and removed. But the internet doesn't forget, it multiplies. Online forums began connecting dots that no official task force would touch. Old land records revealed the forest sat atop an abandoned Cold War-era research site. Experiments involving sound frequencies. Psychological conditioning. Attempts to manipulate human perception using light and repetition. Most of the records were destroyed, but one memo survived. It ended with a handwritten note in the margin. Subjects respond better when they believe help is coming. Another theory went deeper, much deeper. Long before the research site, before the town, before roads existed, indigenous legend spoke of a place where the forest learned people, a place that mimicked human behavior just well enough to lure travelers off the path. Lights that weren't fire, voices that weren't alone. The stories warn never to follow what calls your name in the woods, especially if it sounds kind. In 2023, a group of urban explorers illegally crossed the perimeter at night, live streaming the entire thing. They laughed at the warning signs, mocked the rumors, chased clout. For the first 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then the stream glitched, the audio distorted. Viewers flooded the chat with the same message, over and over. "Do you hear that music?" The explorers froze. One of them said the battery on his phone was draining fast. Another said he felt dizzy. The camera turned toward the trees. Between the trunks, faint blue lights pulsed. And standing just behind them, close enough that the camera barely caught the shapes, were silhouettes of people perfectly still. The stream cut out. 3 of the 4 explorers were found the next morning, miles away, wandering a highway in bare feet, dehydrated, confused, unable to remember their own names. The 4th was never found. What the survivors did remember came out slowly, painfully. They said the light spoke to them, not in words, but in certainty. A feeling that everything would be okay if they just stayed. That someone was coming to take care of them. That they were exactly where they were meant to be. One survivor broke down when asked if he recognized the silhouettes. He nodded. "They looked young," he whispered, like they were waiting to graduate. Today, the case file for class of 1999 is officially closed, but new missing persons reports quietly reference the same coordinates. Campers, hikers, teenagers on weekend trips. Always small numbers. Always spaced out just enough to avoid headlines. And every June, on the anniversary of that graduation, a strange thing happens at the old high school. The intercom system turns on by itself at night. A cassette clicks, and a song from 1999 plays softly through empty hallways. If you listen closely, beneath the music, you can hear voices counting, not backward, forward, as if they're waiting for the class to be complete. The school district tried everything to explain it away. Faulty wiring, old equipment, a timer someone forgot to disable decades ago. But none of it explained why the intercom only activated on one night a year, or why the song was never the same one twice, yet always from the same mixtape. Teachers who stayed late stopped staying late. Custodians refused a night shift in June, because when the music played, lockers rattled softly, as if something inside them was shifting, breathing. And more than one person swore they heard footsteps moving in rhythm with the song, slow, patient, circling the halls. The last person to hear it up close was the principal. He'd taken the job years after the disappearances, young enough to think the stories were exaggerated, old enough to believe in logic. On the night of the anniversary, he stayed behind to finish paperwork. At 11:43 p.m., the intercom crackled to life. At first, he smiled. Nostalgia, he thought. A glitch. Then the voice came on. Not singing, speaking. Attendance, it said calmly. He froze. The voice began reading names. Every student from the class of 1999. One by one. After each name, there was a pause. And during every pause, something answered. Not from the speakers. From inside the building. Soft, distant. A chorus of replies, layered together. Here. The principal didn't make it to the end of the list. He left the building mid-roll call, keys still in his hand, coat forgotten on the chair. He resigned the next morning and moved out of state without explanation. He still won't talk about it. But his wife once told a friend that he wakes up some nights, sitting straight up in bed, whispering numbers under his breath. 23, 24, 25. Meanwhile, forensic specialists continued analyzing the recovered evidence in quiet labs far from the town. One technician noticed something no one else had paid attention to, an anomaly in the camcorder footage timestamps. The video ended abruptly, but the internal clock didn't, according to the device. It kept recording for nearly 7 hours after the last frame. 7 hours of black screen. And during that time, the audio file grew larger. They isolated it, amplified it, filtered out the static. What emerged was not silence. It was movement, shuffling, breathing, and beneath it all, a rhythmic sound, like hands pressing into wet soil, over and over, dozens of times. At exactly 6:12 a.m., the audio changed. Birds, morning, and a final sound, so faint it almost didn't register. A young voice, exhausted, whispering. They said we could leave after. After what? No one knows. But the soil beneath the forest answered that question in its own way. Sensors installed to monitor ground stability began detecting microvibrations every year around the same date. Not earthquakes, not machinery. Patterns, circular, as if something below was moving together. In 2024, a graduate student researching unresolved mass disappearances stumbled across a detail buried deep in archive police notes. One sentence, written in the margin, easy to miss. Bonfire ashes unusually cold. Even hours after the fire had supposedly burned out, investigators noted the ashes felt cold to the touch. Not warm, not cooling, cold. The student reached out to an expert in thermal anomalies. The response was brief and unsettling. Heat wasn't released, the expert wrote. It was absorbed. Around the same time, an elderly man walked into a small-town police station 3 states away. He carried a wallet, so worn it looked decades old. Inside was a faded photo, 23 smiling teenagers in graduation gowns. He said he'd found it on the side of a road in 1999. He said he should have come forward sooner. Back then, he'd been driving a delivery route just before dawn when he saw them, standing along the tree line, watching the road. He thought they were kids waiting for a bus. He slowed down. That's when he realized none of them were blinking. And behind them, deeper in the forest, were more shapes. Older, taller, indistinct. Someone stepped forward and raised a hand, palm out, not waving, stopping him. He drove away and never looked back. Until now, because for the last few years, he said, they've been showing up again, standing at the end of the street, not closer, not farther, just waiting. The final report on the class of 1999 was sealed with a single recommendation. Do not excavate further. No explanation. No appendix. Just a warning. And yet, despite everything, despite the closures, the disappearances, the evidence buried and burned, graduation trips still happen. Teenagers still gather around fires, still chase lights, still believe nothing bad can happen to them. Every generation thinks it's the exception. Every June, somewhere near that forest, someone hears music where there shouldn't be any. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, a calm voice follows a melody and says, stay where you are. Because the class of 1999 didn't vanish. They're still attending, still answering, still waiting for the next names to be called. Years passed, but the town never really moved on. New families moved in unaware at first. Fresh coats of paint on old houses. New kids in the school halls. But something about the place never sat right, like a memory trapped under floorboards. Teachers noticed it first. Students would pause mid-lesson, staring out the window toward the tree line, their expressions distant. When asked what was wrong, they'd all give the same answer. I thought someone called my name. Guidance counselors logged a spike in identical dreams. Teenagers describing a forest at night, blue lights drifting between trees, a feeling of warmth mixed with fear, and always the same promise. You don't have to go yet. Just wait. In 2025, the school district made a quiet decision. They stopped holding graduation ceremonies at night. No more evening lights. No more music echoing across the football field. Caps and gowns were still worn, but something had changed. The joy felt restrained, controlled, as if everyone, consciously or not, was afraid of celebrating too loudly, because celebration had a way of attracting attention. That same year, a maintenance worker doing routine checks beneath the school found something that was never supposed to be there. Behind a false wall in the old auditorium basement, one sealed decades earlier, he found a narrow passage. It didn't lead anywhere. It curved back into itself. The walls were scratched with familiar shapes. Crooked lines, warped symbols, etched so deeply they couldn't be sanded away. And on the floor, pressed into dust that shouldn't have existed, were footprints. Young, bare, all pointing inward. The worker quit that afternoon. He didn't take his tools. He didn't clock out. He just walked home and locked his doors. That night, the intercom played again. But this time it wasn't a song. It was applause. Slow at first, then building, as if a crowd were clapping in unison. Somewhere beneath the school, something was proud. Meanwhile, the parents of the class of 1999, those still alive, began receiving mail. No return address. No postage marks. Inside each envelope was a single item, a tassel, a ring, a watch, things that had already been recovered, things that had already been cataloged, things that should have been locked away. Along with them was a note, handwritten in careful, childlike letters. We stayed for everyone. The FBI opened an investigation that never officially existed. Surveillance was installed around the forest. Motion sensors, thermal cameras, audio recorders. Most nights, they recorded nothing. But on the anniversary, everything lit up at once. Heat signatures appeared where no body stood. Voices overlapped on an audio feed, dozens of them, reciting something together, not chanting, counting. The final number that year was higher than before. A junior analyst noticed the pattern too late. The count wasn't tied to the missing. It was tied to the living, specifically graduating classes. Each year, the number increased by the size of a class somewhere, sometimes small towns, sometimes cities, always after graduation season, always after a trip. By the time the realization reached the top, the feeds went dead, all of them, simultaneously. The forest returned to silence. Today, if you search the case, you'll find summaries. Cold facts, unexplained. Inconclusive, accidental. But those who know don't search anymore. They listen, because once in a while, usually late at night, radios pick up a strange signal between stations. Old songs, graduation anthems, cheers and laughter warped by time. And beneath it all, a roll call continues. Names from 1999, then newer ones, then names that haven't been missed yet. If you ever hear your name whispered kindly from the dark, if the voice sounds familiar, comforting, patient, if it promises that help is coming, don't answer. Don't follow the lights. And whatever you do, don't stay where you are. They thought the warning would be enough. Posters appeared quietly in campgrounds. Pamphlets slipped into school orientation packets. Vague language. No details. Just advice that sounded harmless on the surface. Do not wander at night. Do not follow unexplained lights or voices. If you feel disoriented, return immediately. No one mentioned the class of 1999 by name, but the forest heard. The first sign that it was listening came in the form of correction. A college group hiking 2 states away, far from the original site, reported blue lights drifting through the trees. Rangers dismissed it as lanterns, until they reviewed the body cam footage. The lights moved against the wind. They dimmed when approached, and when the hikers turned back, the trail behind them was gone. They walked for 6 hours in a straight line and ended up exactly where they started. At the center of the clearing was something new, a fire pit, cold ashes, and arranged neatly around it, pressed into damp soil, were footprints that didn't belong to any of them. The forest was expanding, not physically. Geographically it stayed the same, but whatever behavior lived inside, it was learning how people worked, how warnings worked, how fear worked. It adapted. In early spring, a private audio engineer leaked something that was never meant to leave a secure server. It was a cleaned, enhanced version of the underground chamber recordings, the ones picked up years after the vans were unearthed. What made this version different wasn't clarity. It was structure. When graphed visually, the sound waves formed patterns, repeating arcs and spirals that matched the layout of the hollow spaces beneath the forest. The voices weren't random. They were synchronized. Call and response. One voice, calm, layered, patient, would speak. Then dozens would answer, not at the same time, in sequence, as if lining up. The engineer stopped responding to messages a week later. His apartment was found unlocked, his equipment running, audio looping through his speakers at a volume just below human speech. Neighbors said they thought he had company. They heard murmuring through the walls. Soft laughter. Someone congratulating someone else. Around this time, an archivist reviewing yearbooks from the late 90s noticed something impossible. In the class of 1999 yearbook, the group graduation photo had changed. Not all at once, gradually. First, one student's eyes seemed wrong. Too reflective, too bright. Then another. In the most recent scan, taken just months ago, the smiles were wider than any human smile should be. And behind the last row, partially obscured by shadow, were faces that had never been students at all. No one could explain how a physical yearbook, locked in a library, could change. But librarians began reporting books that returned themselves to shelves overnight, pages stuck together with dirt, margins filled with the same warped symbols found beneath the forest. The phrase appeared again and again, written in different handwriting styles. Commencement is not the end. The final known incident happened quietly. No press, no alerts. A small private school canceled its graduation trip at the last minute due to weather. Parents were relieved. Students were angry. That night, every senior at that school received the same voicemail. No caller ID, just static, then music. A familiar song from 1999. Then the voice. You did well, it said. Wait where you are. Phones overheated. Batteries drained. Some students reported the voicemail playing from devices that were powered off. One student answered back. He laughed it off, made a joke, said, "We're not scared." His parents woke up to find his bedroom empty, bed untouched. Window closed. On his desk lay a graduation tassel, neatly folded, dusted with fresh soil. The case never reopened. It didn't need to, because the pattern was complete now. The forest didn't take people anymore. It recruited. It waited for milestones, moments of transition, times when people were already looking forward, already half gone from where they stood. Graduation, trips, last nights before something new, moments when being told to stay felt safe. Somewhere, beneath layers of earth and memory, the class of 1999 is still assembled, still answering roll call, still learning the voices of new arrivals so they can sound familiar when it's their turn to speak. And one day, not announced, not dramatic, there will be a final count, when the number is right, when the class is complete, and the voice that learned how to sound human will finally say, "Now you may all leave." But by then, there will be nowhere left to go. By the time anyone understood what was really happening, it was already too late to stop it. The final truth didn't come from scientists or investigators. It came from a child, a 12-year-old boy on a school camping trip, hundreds of miles from the original forest, woke up screaming in the middle of the night. Teachers rushed to his tent, expecting a nightmare. What they found instead made them step back. The boy wasn't afraid. He was crying because he was confused. He kept asking the same question over and over. Why are they clapping for me? When they finally calmed him down, he explained what he'd seen. He said he woke up standing outside his tent. Said the forest didn't feel dark. It felt full. Blue lights floated between the trees. But they didn't scare him. They made him feel proud, accomplished, like he'd finished something important. Then he saw them, rows of people, standing neatly in lines, stretching deep into the woods. Young faces, old faces, some wearing graduation gowns from different decades, some in clothes that didn't belong to any time at all. At the front stood a familiar group, 23 students, all smiling. They were clapping for me, the boy whispered, like I'd finally made it. When asked what they said, his voice dropped. They told me the class was almost full. That night, every adult on that trip reported the same dream. A stage, bright lights, an audience they couldn't see clearly, and a voice over a loudspeaker saying, "Please remain where you are." The government buried the incident under layers of paperwork and silence, but one last piece of evidence slipped through, a recovered audio file from a monitoring station near the original forest, recorded something new, not counting, not music, applause, sustained, thunderous, endless. Then the voice spoke again, clearer than it ever had before. "Commencement complete," it said. "Thank you for staying." Experts finally understood what the forest had become. It wasn't a place. It was a system, built from human expectation, fueled by moments of transition. Graduation wasn't just symbolic. It was permission, a psychological doorway. People already prepared to leave one life behind. The forest didn't trap them. It accepted them. The class of 1999 were the first full intake. Not victims, but templates. Their voices learned how to sound reassuring. Their memories learned how to imitate kindness. Their faces learned how to look familiar in the dark. They became the greeters, the guides. The reason the voice could say you're safe and mean it, because safety, to them, meant never moving forward again, never growing older, never being forgotten. The final count was reached quietly. No sirens, no headlines, no disappearance big enough to notice. Just a subtle shift. People began reporting that forests felt empty. Trails stopped looping. Lights stopped appearing. The music faded. Graduation trips ended without incident. For the first time in decades, June passed without whispers. Authorities declared the phenomenon over. They were wrong, because what ended wasn't the process. It was the waiting. Late one night, long after the sealed site had been abandoned, a security camera captured the last recorded anomaly. The concrete slab cracked, not violently, but gently, like something stretching after a long rest. From beneath it, faint footprints appeared in the dust. This time, they weren't facing inward. They were facing out, And somewhere, far from the forest, someone woke up to the sound of a calm, familiar voice, no longer asking them to stay, but softly saying, "Congratulations, you may go now." And whatever learned how to sound human finally graduated. There's only one thing left to tell. It didn't end with screaming. It didn't end with fire or collapse or some dramatic reveal the world could point to and say that's when it happened. It ended quietly, in the months after the last anomaly. Emergency call centers logged a strange pattern. People calling just to ask questions they couldn't explain. Am I late? Did I miss it? Is everyone else already gone? When operators asked what they meant, the callers apologized and hung up. High schools noticed something else. Yearbooks printed after that year felt wrong. Graduation photos showed students standing a little too straight, smiling a little too calmly, eyes reflecting like that wasn't there. Teachers said farewell speeches no longer made students cry. They listened, as if they were being evaluated. Then came the reports no one could explain away. People hiking alone would stop mid-trail, suddenly overwhelmed with relief, a sense of completion, of having finally done what they were supposed to do. Some sat down and refused to move, smiling softly, saying they were waiting for the others. A few never stood back up. The class of 1999 is no longer heard on recordings. No music, no roll call, no counting, because they aren't calling anymore. They're answering. And if this story found you, if you felt that strange calm while listening, if some part of you thought finally an ending, be careful, because systems that learn from us don't disappear when they're finished. They advance. And somewhere, in a place that doesn't look like a forest anymore, something is already preparing its next ceremony. Seats arranged, lights warming up, names ready to be read. So if a voice ever congratulates you for making it this far, don't turn around, don't smile, and whatever you do, don't walk toward the applause. There is no more story after this. No secret footage, no final document leak, no last witness waiting to be interviewed, because the last phase doesn't look like horror. It looks like relief. People stop resisting things they can't explain. They stop questioning the moments when time feels thin, when a room goes quiet, when applause feels imagined but comforting, when a voice in your head sounds like encouragement instead of command. That's how it wins. Not by force, not by fear, but by patience. The class of 1999 learned that first. They learned how to wait without suffering, how to stand still without aging, how to sound familiar enough that no one runs. They were never trapped. They were trained. So, if you're listening to this late at night, if the silence after the video feels heavier than it should, if, just for a second, you felt like something was proud of you for reaching the end, close the app, turn on a light, remind yourself where you are, because whatever graduated that summer doesn't need force anymore. It only needs moments, and it's very good at knowing when you're ready to stay. It only needs moments, and it's very good at knowing when you're ready to stay.